A farmer's family poses in 1907, but the scarecrow behind them has eyes. Dr. Sarah Mitchell adjusts her reading glasses as she examines the faded photograph in the Nebraska Historical Society's dusty archive room. The late afternoon October sun filters through tall windows, casting golden light across rows of filing cabinets stuffed with forgotten histories. The black and white image shows the Thornton family, husband, wife, and 3 children, standing proudly in front of their modest farmhouse in 1907. Behind them, barely visible in the background, stands a scarecrow in their cornfield. Another routine donation, Sarah mutters, cataloging items from the recently deceased Eleanor Thornton's estate. The elderly woman had been the last surviving member of the farming family, passing away at 96 with no living relatives. Her lawyer had delivered 3 boxes of photographs, documents, and personal items, with a note that Eleanor wanted everything donated to preserve local history. Sarah had been working as the Historical Society's lead archivist for 15 years, and she'd seen thousands of similar family photographs. Prairie families posing stiffly for the camera, children in their Sunday best, proud parents showing off their land and livestock. This one seemed no different. As Sarah holds the photograph up to the lamp for better lighting, something catches her eye. She reaches for her magnifying glass, focusing on the scarecrow in the distance. Her breath catches. What she initially dismissed as shadows and grain in the old photograph now reveals something impossible. The scarecrow appears to have human eyes, alert, aware, and staring directly at the camera. That's not possible," she whispers, her hands trembling slightly as she sets the photograph down on the wooden desk. The archive room suddenly feels colder. Sarah's colleague, Dr. James Rodriguez, leans over her shoulder as she points to the scarecrow in the background. The afternoon sun streams through the archive's tall windows, casting long shadows across their workspace. James had been working late on a research project about agricultural practices in early 20th century Nebraska when Sarah called him over. "Look at this, James. Tell me what you see," Sarah says, her voice tight with excitement and confusion. James squints at the photograph through the magnifying glass. His expression shifts from casual interest to bewilderment. "Those look like human eyes, but that's impossible. The photography technology in 1907 couldn't capture such detail at that distance, especially not with the exposure times they had back then." "Exactly," Sarah says, pointing to various elements in the photograph. "The family is perfectly in focus in the foreground, but look at the depth of field. Everything behind them should be blurred, yet this scarecrow is crystal clear. The facial features are too defined, too human." She pulls out her laptop and begins researching the Thornton family. Eleanor mentioned in her will that there were family secrets that died with her ancestors. Her lawyer said she seemed troubled by something in her final months, kept talking about setting things right. Maybe this photograph holds one of those secrets. James examines the photo again, this time looking at the broader composition. "Wait, Sarah. Look at the scarecrow's positioning. It's not just the eyes. Look at its posture. Scarecrows don't stand that naturally. The shoulders are too straight, the head positioned too deliberately. And look at the clothes. They're not the typical burlap and straw setup. Those look like real work clothes." Sarah feels a chill run down her spine as the implications begin to sink in. The next morning, Sarah drives through the rolling plains of Nebraska toward the old Thornton property, now abandoned for decades. The autumn wind whistles through her car windows as she navigates the dirt roads that time forgot. Endless fields of harvested corn stretch in every direction, their golden stubble catching the morning light. She parks near the crumbling farmhouse and steps out into the crisp October air. The 2-story wooden structure leans precariously to one side, its paint long since peeled away by prairie winds and harsh winters. Broken windows stare out like empty eye sockets, and the front porch sags under the weight of collapsed roof sections. Sarah walks toward where the cornfield once stood, referring to the original photograph to orient herself. Only a few rotted fence posts remain, along with the foundation stones of what might have been a small outbuilding, perhaps a tool shed or chicken coop. The land has been fallow for years, overtaken by tall prairie grass and wild sunflowers. Her phone buzzes with a text from James. "Found something in the county records. The Thornton farm had a hired hand in 1907, a man named Thomas Briggs. No further records of him after that year. Employment record shows he was owed 3 months' wages when he disappeared." Sarah photographs the property from multiple angles, trying to recreate the perspective of the original 1907 image. As she walks through the overgrown field, stepping carefully around hidden holes and twisted metal debris, she notices something glinting in the tall grass near where the scarecrow would have stood. Kneeling down, she brushes away dirt and dead leaves to reveal a small metal button, the kind used on work clothes from the early 1900s. Her heart races as she realizes this might be physical evidence connected to the mysterious figure in the photograph. The wind picks up, and for a moment, Sarah feels as though she's being watched by eyes that have been staring from this field for over a century. Back in town, Sarah visits Murphy's Diner, a local institution where longtime residents gather for coffee and conversation every morning. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee fills the air, and the walls are decorated with photographs spanning the town's century-long history. She shows the photograph to Martha Henderson, 83 years old and born in the area. "Oh my, that's the old Thornton place," Martha says, adjusting her bifocals and studying the image carefully. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that family. Strange things happened out there," she said. "The whole family left town suddenly in 1908, sold the farm for much less than it was worth." "What kind of strange things?" Sarah asks, pulling out her notebook and settling into the worn vinyl booth. "Well, there was talk about a hired hand who went missing. Some folks said he ran off to California, but others—" Martha lowers her voice and glances around the diner. "Others said something terrible happened to him. My grandmother claimed she saw him working in that field weeks after people said he'd left town. She said it gave her the shivers." An elderly man at the next table overhears and scoots his chair closer. "Name's Bill Crawford. My great-uncle worked for the railroad back then. He told me the Thorntons came to town asking about train schedules to California. Said their hired man had taken off suddenly. But the strange thing was, they came asking about it 2 weeks after people had already seen the man working their field." Sarah's pulse quickens. "Are you certain about the timing?" "As certain as I can be about something that happened over a century ago," Bill says, nodding slowly. "My great-uncle thought it was odd enough to mention it to family. Said Mr. Thornton seemed nervous, kept looking over his shoulder like he was afraid of something." Martha adds, "My grandmother always said there was something wrong with how that family left town. Middle of the night, didn't say goodbye to anyone." Sarah spends the next day in the basement archives of the county courthouse, surrounded by ledgers and documents that haven't been disturbed in decades. The musty smell of old paper fills her nostrils as she searches through employment records, land deeds, and legal documents. Dust motes dance in the pale light filtering through high, barred windows. The basement feels like a tomb of forgotten bureaucracy. Metal filing cabinets line the walls, their paint chipped and handles worn smooth by countless hands. Sarah works methodically through boxes marked 1907, 1908, her fingers growing black with dust and age. In a leather-bound ledger dated 1907, she finds an entry that makes her heart skip. Thomas Briggs, hired hand, Thornton Farm, wages unpaid, whereabouts unknown. Last seen October 16, 1907. But 3 pages later, she discovers something even more intriguing. A complaint filed by Martha Briggs, claiming her brother Thomas had been cheated of his wages and asking the sheriff to investigate. The complaint was dated October 30, 1907, 2 weeks after the Thorntons had supposedly inquired about Thomas leaving for California. Sarah photographs every relevant page with her phone, her excitement building. She also finds a sheriff's report noting that the Thornton family had cooperated fully with the investigation, but could provide no useful information about the hired hand's whereabouts. She calls James from the courthouse steps, the autumn air crisp against her face. "I found something," she says breathlessly. "There are discrepancies in the timeline. The family claimed Thomas left for California, but his sister filed a complaint saying he'd been cheated of wages. The dates don't match up with witness accounts." "Sarah, I've been analyzing the photograph with imaging software," James responds. "The scarecrow's clothes, they're not typical scarecrow materials. They look like actual work clothes from that period. Heavy cotton, not burlap. And there's something else. I can make out what looks like a rope around the neck area." Following a lead from the courthouse records, Sarah tracks down the descendants of Martha Briggs. Thomas's great-great-niece, Linda Walsh, lives in Omaha and agrees to meet at a local coffee shop downtown. The modern cafe contrasts sharply with the historical mystery they're about to discuss. "I always wondered what happened to my ancestor," Linda says, opening a small wooden box she brought with her. The box is carved with intricate designs, clearly a family heirloom passed down through generations. "My great-grandmother kept some of Thomas's belongings. including this letter he wrote to his sister just before he disappeared. She always said the family should know the truth someday. Sarah's hands shake as she unfolds the delicate paper. The ink has faded to brown, but the words are still legible in careful, educated handwriting. The letter, dated October 15, 1907, just days before the family photograph was taken, reads, "Dear Martha, something isn't right here at the Thornton place. Mr. Thornton owes me 3 months' wages, but every time I ask for payment, he gets angry and threatens to have me arrested for theft. He claims I stole tools that I never even touched, says he has witnesses who will swear to it. I'm scared, Martha. Mrs. Thornton looks at me like she wishes I was dead, and their oldest boy follows me around the property like he's watching for something. I'm going to demand my wages tomorrow morning, and if they don't pay, I'm leaving for California like we planned. If you don't hear from me by month's end, something terrible has happened. Don't let them get away with it." Linda wipes tears from her eyes. "He never made it to California, did he? My great-grandmother always said Thomas was the honest one in the family, never would have stolen anything or run away from his responsibilities." Sarah looks at the letter, then at the photograph. "I don't think he made it anywhere, Linda. I think he's still there." Dr. Patricia Yoshida, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Nebraska, meets Sarah at the abandoned Thornton property on a gray, overcast morning. Armed with ground-penetrating radar equipment and soil analysis tools, they begin scanning the area where the cornfield once stood. Dr. Yoshida's graduate students help carry equipment across the uneven terrain. "If someone was buried here over a century ago, we should be able to detect soil disturbances," Dr. Yoshida explains as she calibrates the equipment. The radar can penetrate several feet into the earth and identify variations in soil density and composition. The team works methodically, creating a grid pattern across the field. Sarah watches the radar screen, which displays soil layers in different colors and densities. Most of the field shows consistent patterns, natural soil layers accumulated over decades of prairie weather. The radar reveals several anomalies in the soil, areas where the earth was disturbed and then refilled. One particular spot, approximately where the scarecrow stood in the 1907 photograph, shows a clear rectangular depression about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. "This is consistent with a grave," Dr. Yoshida says grimly, pointing to the clear outline on the radar screen. "The soil composition is different here, suggesting it was dug up and refilled. There's also evidence of organic material that's different from the surrounding earth." Sarah stares at the spot, imagining Thomas Briggs demanding his wages on that October morning in 1907, unaware that the Thorntons had already decided his fate. They killed him for asking for money they owed him. "It was a different time," Dr. Yoshida replies, removing her gloves and looking across the desolate field. "Hired hands often had no legal protections. A family could claim someone stole from them, and who would believe a drifter over established landowners? Local law enforcement might not have investigated too thoroughly." The wind rustles through the dead grass, and Sarah shivers, feeling the weight of a century-old injustice pressing down on her shoulders like the heavy Nebraska sky. That evening, Sarah and James reconstruct the likely events of October 1907 in James's office at the Historical Society. Spread across his desk are copies of documents, photographs, and a large timeline they've created using all the evidence they've gathered. The office is warm and bright, a stark contrast to the cold prairie where the tragedy unfolded. Thomas writes to his sister on October 15th, expressing fear and stating he'll demand his wages the next day. Sarah says, pointing to their timeline, "The family photograph is taken on October 18th. We know this from the date written on the back in pencil. And in that photograph, Thomas is likely already dead, positioned as a scarecrow to hide the evidence in plain sight." James adds grimly, studying the image under a powerful magnifying lamp. "It's both brilliant and horrifying. Who would think to look closely at a scarecrow in a family portrait?" Sarah continues, tracing the timeline with her finger. "The Thorntons file their false report about Thomas leaving for California on October 20th, giving them time to stage the scene and create their alibi. By the time his sister filed her complaint on October 30th, they had a neat explanation and 2 weeks to get their story straight." "But why take the photograph with the body visible?" James asks, leaning back in his chair. Sarah stares at the image, studying Mrs. Thornton's expression, proud, almost defiant. "I think it was Mrs. Thornton's idea. She wanted a family portrait to commemorate their prosperity. and they couldn't move the body during daylight without risking exposure from neighbors or passing travelers, so they took the chance that no one would look closely at the background. The irony is devastating, James observes. In 1907, who had magnifying technology powerful enough to see the detail we can see now? They thought they were safe. The horrible irony wasn't lost on either of them. The family's desire to capture a moment of prosperity had inadvertently preserved evidence of their crime for over a century. The next morning brings news that changes everything. Dr. Yoshida calls Sarah with results from the soil analysis, her voice tight with professional excitement mixed with grim confirmation. We've found fabric fragments and metal buttons consistent with 1907 work clothing. But Sarah, there's something else. We found bone fragments, and they're definitely human. Sarah meets with Linda Walsh and Martha Henderson that afternoon to share the discoveries. The three women sit in Martha's living room, surrounded by antique furniture and family photographs that span generations. The weight of history settles around them like dust motes floating in the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. "My great-grandmother was right," Martha says quietly, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "She always said something evil happened at that farm. She used to tell me that the Thorntons left town suddenly in early 1908, sold the farm for much less than it was worth and moved to Oregon, never spoke to anyone in town again." Linda holds Thomas's letter against her chest, tears streaming down her face. He was just trying to get paid for his work. 3 months of honest labor in the fields, and they murdered him rather than pay what they owed. Sarah looks at the photograph one more time, seeing it with completely new eyes. Now she can see what she missed before. The unnatural way the scarecrow's head is positioned, tilted at an angle that suggests a broken neck, the too human proportions, the way the clothes hang on a real frame rather than stuffing, the eyes that seem to stare directly at the camera because they were the eyes of a dead man, held in place by the very work clothes he died wearing. The scarecrow had eyes because it was Thomas, Sarah says softly. They killed him, probably strangled him based on the rope James detected in the photograph, then dressed his body in his own work clothes and left him in the field. It was both hiding the evidence and sending a message to anyone else who might demand what they were owed. 6 months later, Sarah stands before a crowd of over 200 people gathered at the Nebraska Historical Society. Behind her, a newly installed exhibit tells the story of Thomas Briggs, not as a missing person, but as a murder victim whose story was hidden for over a century. Local news crews document the event, and several university researchers have expressed interest in studying the case as an example of early 20th century labor exploitation. The exhibit includes his letter to his sister, enlarged and displayed under protective glass, the family photograph with detailed analysis explaining what the scarecrow really was, soil samples from the Thornton property, and the metal button Sarah found in the field. Linda Walsh donated Thomas's few remaining possessions, including his work tools and a Bible, to ensure his memory would be preserved with dignity. Photography was meant to capture moments of joy, family, and prosperity. Sarah addresses the audience, her voice carrying across the silent room. But sometimes, inadvertently, it captures truth. This photograph held a secret for 117 years. The secret that Thomas Briggs didn't abandon his responsibilities or run away to California for a better life. He was murdered by the very people who owed him honest wages for honest work. Martha Henderson, now 84, sits in the front row with tears in her eyes, flanked by several of her own grandchildren who have driven in from surrounding counties. "My great-grandmother always said the truth would come out eventually. She was right. She used to say the prairie remembers everything, even when people try to forget." After the ceremony, Sarah walks outside into the Nebraska sunshine. In her hand, she holds a modern photograph, a portrait of Thomas Briggs's newly erected headstone in the local cemetery, purchased with money donated by community members who were moved by his story. The inscription reads, "Thomas Briggs, 1879-1907. Honest worker. Justice delayed but not denied." The old photograph that started it all now rests in a climate-controlled case, no longer hiding its terrible secret. Thomas Briggs finally has his voice back, and his story serves as a reminder that even the oldest photographs can speak truth to power, no matter how long they're forced to remain silent. As Sarah looks across the Nebraska prairie, she knows that somewhere in dusty archives and forgotten attics, other photographs wait patiently to tell their own buried truths. Was murdered by the very people who owed him honest wages for honest work. Martha Henderson, now 84, sits in the front row with tears in her eyes. My great-grandmother always said the truth would come out eventually. She was right. After the ceremony, Sarah walks outside into the Nebraska sunshine. In her hand, she holds a modern photograph, a portrait of Thomas Briggs's headstone, newly erected in the local cemetery, with money donated by the community. The inscription reads, Thomas Briggs, 1879-1907, honest worker, justice delayed but not denied. The old photograph that started it all now rests in a climate-controlled case, no longer hiding its terrible secret. Thomas Briggs finally has his voice back, and his story serves as a reminder that even the oldest photographs can speak truth to power, no matter how long they're forced to remain silent.